Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come here tonight. Thank Dean for inviting me, and for the elders saying it's okay for him to speak again. So that's always a good thing. I don't know what time I'm supposed to end, because I feel like I'm starting 2 hours early, So I feel like we got all the time in the world tonight to cover Proverbs chapter 3. As you've been going through the wisdom literature, there's a lot of information there that's important to you, and Proverbs chapter 3 is probably one of my favorite chapters in Proverbs. There's a lot of reasons why you should seek out wisdom, and you find out a lot of those reasons here in Proverbs chapter 3. A proverb is just some wise saying, and it's usually got to do with some common sense. And more so when you're talking about Scripture, it has to do not only with common sense, but also about the wisdom of God. What wisdom we receive from God. I'd like you to turn over to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1. We've been studying this book at Lake Norman on Wednesday nights. And it just so happens that within the first chapter of the book of Colossians, Paul is praying for them to grow in their knowledge, their understanding, and their wisdom. And so if you skip down to Colossians 1 verse 9, he says, "For this reason also, since the day I heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, increasing in the knowledge of God." We'll stop there. There's a lot more in that prayer that's important, but we're not here to preach on Colossians chapter 1. But you notice the prayer Paul has. He says, I want you to grow in wisdom and knowledge. Why, Paul? So that you can be pleasing to the Lord, so that you can bear fruit. And so I'm excited that you all are studying through the wisdom literature and looking into how you can gain wisdom so that you can be pleasing to the Lord, and so that you can bring glory and honor to him. A proverb isn't just found in the book of Proverbs. There are proverbs all over in the Bible, throughout the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. But probably one of my favorite ones is found in 1 Kings chapter 20. 1 Kings chapter 20 and verse 11, where the king of Israel responds to Ben-Hadad, and he says, "Tell him, let not him who girds on his armor boast like him who takes it off." Right? It reminds me of my childhood and the competitive nature that we had. We start just boasting towards each other and saying, "I'm going to beat you, man. I'm getting out there to play basketball. We haven't even started the game yet, and I'm better than you. I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to wipe the floor with you." And then all of a sudden, what happens next? It's like your pants have been pulled down and you lost to this other person by a bunch of points. You felt like you had it, but they're the ones with the last laugh, right? They're the ones that won the game. Here's the soldier boasting he's going to win this battle, and you need to make sure that you've actually won the battle before you can begin that boasting. And so that's one of my favorite ones. If we're going to boast, maybe wait till it's actually towards the end and you know you've won. So at any rate, Proverbs chapter 3, if you go ahead and turn over there, King Solomon is the primary writer for the book of Proverbs. And it seems that he's done it mostly for his sons, and certainly for the noble young men in Israel. But when you think about Solomon, he's one that, what did he ask God for? Wisdom, right? That's it. He's going to become king. David has died. Here is Solomon going to rule God's people, and God says, I will give you what you ask for. I will bless you. And he asks for wisdom. That in and of itself was wise. And so here we are studying a book where Solomon is trying to pass on as much wisdom as possible to his own sons. And so in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 1, he says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace, they will add to you." Fathers ought to be teaching their children. They ought to be giving their wisdom to their children. I know that we've got some wonderful schools and some wonderful teachers, and we've got some wonderful people that help us within the church to help teach our children. but we got to, as fathers, as mothers, as parents, to make sure we are doing our best to pass on the wisdom that we've gained and we've learned from our parents, and more importantly, from our Heavenly Father, to pass it on to the young ones. And I've got 4 here with me tonight. I got another one off trying to gain some more wisdom in Colorado. Hopefully she gains a little bit while she's there. But as fathers, we need to pass on that wisdom. And here in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 1, he says, let your heart keep my commandments. Let your heart keep my commandments. We listen to commandments. We've heard sermons. We've had teachers come and teach all kinds of lessons, and they've been great, and they've given us a lot of wisdom. But did we let it sink into our hearts? Did we say, oh, that was great? And then, well, a few days later, I forgot what he said, and I didn't really mean anything to me after that anyway, and I don't really care now. I wish I could remember, but it's not that big of a deal anymore. Well, that's great that we heard some wisdom, but is it written on the heart? Is it something that we care about? In Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, God makes a promise that he's going to make a new covenant with his people. And within that covenant, his law is going to be written on their hearts. And that's us. We're part of that new covenant. That's where his law, that's where his wisdom, that's where everything he has given us should be written, is right on our hearts. And so as Solomon is giving this wisdom to his sons, he says, don't forget my teaching. Remember it, please. Don't forget the laws that I've given. And make sure that your heart keeps them. Hold on to them. Keep them close to your heart. But he also gives some promises that come along. He says in verse 2, for length of days and years of life and peace will be added to you. Length of days is the quality of life. The years of life is the duration. And the peace is the prosperity, the well-being, the health that you would have. When Jews would gather and would meet with one another, and what would they say? Shalom, right? What are they saying? Peace be to you. You know, we wish peace upon you and your household. That's what he says. It says wisdom is going to give you that. If you're wise, you'll have more peace than you had before. Verse 3, do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Once again, keep it in your heart. Write it on the tablet. When you write on a tablet, it's not like he just had a marker and just, wrote on a tablet and used some whiteout, or with a tablet, you're etching it into the stone. Write it on the tablet of your heart for it never to be erased. But he says, let kindness and truth not leave you. This kindness and truth has the idea of loyalty. Loyalty and honesty. And it's these words, when they come up in Scripture, a lot of times it has to do with a covenant relationship. Our covenant relationship between us and God, a covenant relationship between a man and his wife. When you think about kindness and truth, well, if you're not honest with your partner, how great is that relationship going to go? Right? If they can't even trust you to give them the honest answer, how long is that relationship going to last? If there's no loyalty, if there's no kindness towards one another, when we have wronged one another, and there's no one there to forgive, it's not going to last. And so we need to make sure that we have those attributes, and that's part of the wisdom that we need to gain. He says to bind them around your neck. Don't leave the house without them. Keep them on you at all times. Write them on the heart. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Verse 4. By the way, there's 35 verses in here. It's like I've got 35 points plus a few for tonight. So good luck with that. Verse 4. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. If you have this wisdom, if you remember my words, if you hold to these commandments, if they're written on your heart, if you have kindness and truth and all these things, you will find favor and good repute in both the sight of God and man. I've heard something like that before in the New Testament, Luke chapter 2. You remember where Jesus is a young man and he's gone to the temple and all these things have happened, and his mom and dad are gone. They come back and, well, where have you been? I've been about my Father's business, right? I got to do my Father's will. Good old little Jesus, right? 12 years old. But it goes on to say that he grew in favor in the eyes of man and God. And that's exactly what we should be doing. If we're studying the Proverbs and we're gaining the wisdom and knowledge that we need, then we should be growing in favor with both man and God. We're not supposed to live our life just to be pleasing to man, but if we have wisdom, we're going to be able to deal with our fellow man in a much better way than if we don't have that wisdom. So you will find favor with man and with God with this wisdom that Solomon is imparting. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. This was a memory verse from a VBS from when I was like 12. And I can remember the song, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will keep your path straight. And he will keep your path straight. Stuck with me from that time. And what did it remind me all the years of my life? Trust in God. Stick with him. If you don't know where to turn or where to go next, then turn back to God. Trust in him. He knows the way you need to be going. Not only that, he will make your path straight. He will remove some of the obstacles that are in your way. He will help you find the end of the tunnel. When it seems like there is no hope, God says, I've got the path for you. He will help you if you will simply trust in him and lean on him, on his wisdom, not on your own understanding. Which leads us into verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. He says, remember, don't boast in your own wisdom. And the book of Judges is one that tells us the people started to do what was right in their own eyes. And when that happened, everything fell apart. Here's God calling up judges to lead the people back, and the people do great for 20, 40 years while that judge is still alive and ruling. And then, as soon as they die, what happens to the people? Well, they go back to doing what was right in their own eyes, following their own understanding, not relying on God's wisdom. So, don't boast in your own understanding. Follow the Lord and learn from him. Verse 8, it will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord from your wealth and the first of your produce, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. All right. Verse 8 says it'll be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Why is that? When you're following the wisdom and understanding of God and you're pleasing to him and your relationship with him is in the right place, guess what? You're not as anxious as you were before. You're not freaking out about all the things that you need to do because you're trusting in God. You're not trusting in your own wisdom. It brings health. Now, as you look at this in verse 8, it doesn't promise the fact that everyone's going to be completely healthy if they just follow the Lord. It's just a proverb. It's generally true. If you follow this, if you lean on his understanding, you're going to do things that will keep you away from unhealthy habits. You're going to do things that are pleasing to him, and he will bless you, right? He will help you. He will be there for you. Also, verses 9 and 10 have to do with what we do with our money, what we do with our material blessings, what God has given us already. What are you going to do with it? Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce. You didn't know you were going to get a lesson on giving tonight, were you? But here we are. Did we understand that when we give financially, that when we make a sacrifice, when we're giving back to God, it brings him honor? Not only that, when we choose not to, what does that do? It brings him dishonor. We need to make sure that we are willing to give him what is due to him. He says the first fruits. When you look at Abel and Cain and what they do in the first part of the book of Genesis chapter 4, and what they give, Well, give of the first fruits. That's what needs to happen. That's why God he showed favor towards Abel. Giving of the first fruits. Are we making sure that we are giving him what is due to him? Malachi chapter 3, if you want to turn over there real quick. Malachi chapter 3 deals a little bit with the Israelites and their struggle in giving to God what they ought to be giving. And in chapter 3, in verse 10, he says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Not just part of it, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. And test me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. One of the things that we learn from this section, and not only in Malachi, but Proverbs verses 9 and 10 in chapter 3, is that if we are willing to give, if we are willing to do what he said to do, guess what? You can't outgive God. He'll give you more blessings. Why? To him who is a faithful steward, what? He's going to give you more. What did he do with the steward that had the 5 talents? Well, you're good and faithful. Give him the 5 that he also already earned. Let's continue this process. The one that had 2, give these ones that you had before and the ones that you've earned. But the one that had 1 and didn't give anything, didn't do anything, didn't invest it, didn't do anything with it, just buried it. Well, I knew you to be a hard man, master. Well, you're right, I am a hard man. Because you didn't do anything with the talent that I gave you. You didn't do anything with that money that I gave you. I'm going to strip it away and I'm going to cast you out. God expects us to give and to invest in him and in his work and give him glory and honor and praise because he is deserving of it. Going back to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. This is quoted in Hebrews chapter 12 by the Hebrew writer, wanting us to remember that when we are going through a trial, well, maybe the Lord is also disciplining us, trying to get us corrected, trying to get us back onto the right path, making sure that we're doing those right things. Are we willing to take that discipline? Notice what he says there in verse 11. Do not reject. We get to choose to accept it or reject it. And he's telling his son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord. It was getting hot up here too. One of those things. Verse 13. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than the profit of silver, or her gain better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. How blessed is the man. Reminds me of Psalm 1. I wish I could just go to that passage and start preaching from Psalm 1. But I know Corey Sawyers is coming here next week to do that very psalm. So I got to be careful about what I say. But in Psalm 1, which is kind of this introduction into the wisdom literature of one of its biggest themes, it starts off by saying, how blessed is the man. What does it mean to be blessed? Some people say, well, being blessed or blessed means that you're happy, that you're joyful, right? That you're filled with happiness and joy. That's great. And that is a part of it. But why are you filled with happiness and joy? Because you've been approved by God, because you are pleasing to him, because you have found favor in his sight. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, here in verse 13, and the man who gains understanding. He says the profit, the value of wisdom and understanding exceeds anything you can get here on earth. Whether it's gold, silver, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's fine jewels, anything that's precious here that you would consider valuable, he says wisdom outweighs it all. It's greater and better than all of that. And wisdom has in her right hand long life. All right, here's that long life that you'll gain if you have wisdom. Let me tell you, it's a lot of times it would be long life here on earth, because if you're living a wise life, then you're probably not doing things that would shorten your life. But it's also a long life that's guaranteed in eternity. Because if you're truly wise and following God's wisdom, then you're following the path that leads to him for all eternity. But then you also have in her left hand, which isn't quite as good as the right hand. The right hand's better than the left hand. But look at the left hand. The left hand is filled with riches and honor, and you will be blessed and honored if you have wisdom. Verse 17, her ways, wisdom's ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. It kind of goes back to what he's already said in verse 2. That wealth, that peace, the length of days, years of life, all this will be added if you hold on to that wisdom. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. As you start to read the riches and the blessings of wisdom in chapter 3 here, doesn't it just make you feel good? It just seems like, man, if I can just grab hold of the wisdom that God has, if I can hold on to it and I can treasure it and I can continue to study it and to read it and make it mine and bring it into my heart and into my life and do it day in and day out, I'm going to be one blessed individual. But not only that, we'll get to it later in this passage, that we will get to bless others. Going to have to discipline from up here. It said in verses 11 and 12, do not reject the discipline, right? So, you got to make sure that you have the discipline here. All right, but here we are. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is that tree of life, verse 18, hold on to her. She will bring you happy days. The Lord by wisdom, as we move into this new section, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps were broken up and the skies drip with dew. My son, let them not vanish from your sight. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life to your soul and adornment to your neck. Then you will walk in your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor the onslaught of the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. If you go back to verses 19 through 20 there, he talks about the creation and how the Lord's wisdom is involved in the creation. When you think about science today, what has science been doing ever since it became a thing? Okay, well, it's trying to disprove a lot of things in regards to the Bible and to God and all that. But what does science marvel in? It marvels in the creation. It marvels in what has been made and how it works and how beautiful and how wonderful it is. And how can we not only observe it and observe the laws that govern it, but how can we recreate it? You know, I see this bird that's flying. How can I make something that flies? And lo and behold, we give birth to airplanes, right? How can we do these things? Look at what God has created. How can I do that too? As man observes what God has created, it is beautiful, it is wonderful. There's wisdom found within the creation. And as you look at that wisdom, it should make us turn to God. And of course, that's what a number of passages in Scripture tell us. As we look at this wisdom in the creation, rather than worshiping the creation, we should be worshiping the Creator. But his wisdom is declared in the creation. I'd like for you to turn over to the book of Job. Job chapter 28. Job chapter 28. Poor Job, struggling in a lot of ways. But in verse 12 of Job 28, he says, where can wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. Now skip down to verse 23. God understands its way, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he imparted weight to the wind and meted out the waters by measure, when he set a limit for the rain and a course for the thunderbolt, when he saw it and declared it, he established it and also searched it out. And to man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding. Job seemed to be pretty wise. Seemed to learn a lot from the creation, seeing God's wisdom that is found within it. Going back to chapter 3 of Proverbs, he appeals to his son again in verse 21. Don't let this wisdom vanish from your sight. Hold on to it. Keep it close. Keep it in your heart. So they will be life to your soul, verse 22, and adornment to your neck. And you will walk in your way securely. Wisdom brings security. It's not something that we think about all the time, but there are some benefits to wisdom that are really interesting to think about. In verse 23, it's security. It stabilizes us. In verse 24, it encourages sleep. It allows you to sleep. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Wisdom gives that to you. How about the security in verse 25? Do not be afraid of sudden fear, nor the onslaught of the wicked when it comes. Why? Because of verse 26. Where is your confidence placed? In the Lord. Because he is there and you know he is there, there is no need to be afraid of the wicked. Because who do you truly fear? As Job said, behold, fear the Lord. That is the beginning of wisdom. And so as you look at this, there are a lot of blessings from wisdom. As we move into the last part of this chapter, verse 27, we start to get into how we can form relationships with mankind, how we can help understand one another, how we can encourage one another, and not be wicked or evil towards one another. So, verse 27, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Kind of reminds me of James chapter 2, right? Somebody knocks on your door. Hey, I need some food. I need some clothes. I don't have anything. As you can see, I'm bare, right? He comes to the door and you say, as a Christian, brother, I'm praying for you. Be warmed and be filled. You know what? Maybe if you come back tomorrow, I might have something for you. Notice what he says in verse 28 here. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back, and tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you now, right? If you have it with you now, do it, give it, help them out. The opportunity that you might be seeking for tomorrow may not come. How many times have you said, I'll get to it tomorrow, and when tomorrow comes, you never got to it? Because, well, something else came up, something else more important. Sorry, I wasn't home yesterday. I told you to come back, but I wasn't home because something else happened. And so you missed out on the opportunity to do good when you had the power to do it. Verse 29, do not devise harm against your neighbor while he lives securely beside you. Do you have some good neighbors? I've got some good ones. I've got one that has a drum set. And they're all right. They cut the grass, come in, and then they go, and every night they get up into the room and they just start going onto those drums. They're all right people. For the most part, they're good neighbors. But I wish they didn't bang those drums when it was bedtime for the kids. But we need to make sure, as we look at this section here, if we devise harm against our neighbor, if we contend with a man, verse 30, if we envy a man of violence, verse 31, if we are doing those kinds of things, we're not being wise. Instead, we're starting to agitate. We're starting to bring forth the problems. And a wise man is someone that is a peacemaker. Romans chapter 12 and verse 18 talks about the fact that as long as it's in our power, we should be trying to make peace with all men. You're getting spankings afterwards. Nolan, sit up. Get up right now. So do not contend with a man without cause, if he has done nothing to harm you. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways, for the devious are an abomination to the Lord, but he is intimate with the upright. One of the things that you'll notice within the wisdom literature is the chasm between the wicked and the righteous, and how that it's just one way or the other. It's introduced to us in Psalm 1. It's continued throughout the Psalms and into the Proverbs. There's two choices you've got to make. Are you going to be someone who lives upright, like Job, right? An upright and blameless man. Or are you going to be someone that chooses to live a wicked life, that is a devious, a crooked man, someone who is an abomination to the Lord? I hope that we choose wisdom and choose to live the righteous life. Verse 34, though he scoffs at the scoffers, yet he gives grace to the afflicted. God truly wants to bless you. If you're being afflicted, he has compassion for you. So one of the things that you notice in the ministry of Jesus is he talks about who is my neighbor. By the way, I'd encourage you to read through Proverbs and some of this wisdom literature and look at the terms neighbor and friend. Look those terms up in a concordance and look at all the passages related to friend and neighbor and see what you can learn about how to deal with one another. He says, who is my neighbor? Jesus gives this. Some say it's a parable. Some say it might be an actual account of what happens. But we call it the Good Samaritan, right? And what does this Samaritan do? He helps a Jew that would look at him as if he was nothing. And the Samaritan helps this man that's left naked, that's beaten, that's bleeding. He does what he can to help him on the side of the road. Takes him to an inn and pays them some money to help cover what needs to be done for him there at the inn at that moment, and to keep him there and do whatever else they can. And when he is on his way back from doing the business he has traveled there to do, I will pay you what is still owed. Whatever you've done to help him, I will pay you that as well. So when Jesus says, well, who then is his neighbor, right? Who is my neighbor? Everyone. Every soul, every person, every man, every woman, every child, every person is someone that is your neighbor and that you should deal kindly with. Verse 35, the wise will inherit honor, but fools display dishonor. The wise and the fool, right? Are we going to choose to live our life following after the wisdom of God? Or are we going to choose a different path? Are we going to go after the foolish path? One that leads to destruction. I'd like for you to turn over to Ecclesiastes, another book written by Solomon. Calls himself the preacher in this book. Seems fitting since I'm a preacher. The conclusion. When all has been heard. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. When all has been heard is, fear God, keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. I like the King James Version better. Does somebody have that? Somebody have the King James Version? Can you read it loudly for everyone to hear? Verse 13. New King James might have it too. Go ahead.
13.
Yes.
Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all.
All right, for this is man's all. I think the King James has, for this is the whole duty of man, right? I mean, Solomon says, listen, guys, I can give you all the proverbs in the world. I can give you every wise saying that I've ever come up with myself, any wise saying I've ever picked up from somebody else. I can give it all to you. But let me boil it all down to this. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every single one of you. And then verse 14, why is that so important? For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Choose to live the wise path. Why? Solomon's given you a number of reasons. There's wealth, there's health. We're not preaching a wealth health sermon tonight, but what he's given is wisdom leads you to those things because you deal well with money if you're wise with money. You do the healthy thing if you're wise with your health. You do the things that stay away from those bad stuff, that stays away from the things that hurt you, that harm your body. But most importantly, it's because you're pleasing God. And God has an intimate relationship with those who please him and who seek to please him. If you are here this evening and you have not obeyed the gospel, you have not followed after God with all of your heart, you have not chosen to live that life, I implore you to do it. Solomon says, my son, keep these commandments close to you, write them on your heart, have them on the tablet, carry it with you, wrap it around your neck, take it with you wherever you go. Why is Solomon doing that? Because it's that important. If you don't hold on to God's wisdom and his laws and his commandments and what he's given, then you're going to go off the wrong path. You're going to go following someone else that might be preaching something that's nice, that tickles the ears, that sounds good. It didn't seem like it was that far off from what I heard at the church down the street, so I'm going to follow that. We got to be careful. Make sure that we follow the Lord's wisdom. Solomon knew how important it was, and yet he too struggled. Here he is given all kinds of wisdom, and he struggled to follow after wisdom, and he was led astray. Hold fast to the wise words of your Heavenly Father that he has revealed to you in this book, and your life will be blessed. He said there in Proverbs chapter 3, how blessed is the man who finds wisdom. If you have a need, please come while we stand and while we sing.